something like this is too busy setting up. So we always
Sure.
travel on Wednesday. In Baku, though, tracks like Baku where we have like a 4 hour time difference, and it's a bit more not jet lag, but it's close to being jet lag.
Right.
Um, I would ideally be flying tomorrow on Tuesday,
Hmm.
but just in this typical scenario, the flights are awful.
Ah,
Um,
damn.
so I'm having to travel for Wednesday morning, which is a bit later than I would like to be there, to be honest.
Sure.
Um, but no, if it's just for the racing purpose, we would always travel on the Wednesday. If I wanted to
Gotcha.
go and see the city, on the other hand, I might travel on the Monday or something like that. But to be honest, I'm so busy
I
these
can't
days
imagine.
that
Yeah.
my calendar is a joke at the moment. Um, I think I've got between January and September, I've got 23 race weekends.
Wow.
Um, so I don't know how many it's like out of what 38, 39, I guess something like that. 23 race weekends and about 70 days of simulator running.
Wow.
Um, and then all the travel days in between, stuff like that. So I am not that motivated, to be honest, at the moment to
Yeah.
then go and visit a city for an extra day. I'd rather just sit at home and just see the family.
I get that. And also you made me feel a little bit special with making me feel like that I fit into that very busy schedule you have. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I
But
squeezed you in.
I was about to say, I maybe you kind of boosted my ego a little bit there, Jake. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
You're a very prominent F2 racer. You're very busy. I can make it into that schedule. That's just the
You're
guy I am.
priority number one.
But now that we are kind of towards the end, I can't thank you enough. You've been great. As a fan now, as a fan of the sport, where are some areas that you've seen the sport improve, maybe from a fan's perspective and from like the racing as a whole? And then, maybe where is there an aspect of racing, maybe we could, as fans do a better job or continue to raise awareness?
Um, I mean, I think in terms if I speak for Formula One at the moment, because I think obviously Formula One is the benchmark
Sure.
in terms of like fan engagement and things like this. It's Formula One since Liberty Media have been involved since 2017, something like this. They've done a brilliant job, to be honest. Liberty
Okay.
Media. The sport before they came in was quite closed off. It
Sure.
was. It wasn't like it was on TV and these things, but they went. Social media has been around since like 2007, 8
Yeah.
area. YouTube and things like this, and they were never involved in it. They didn't see any benefit in it. So the only time you would see Formula One is on TV
Yeah.
that hour or 2 hours or whatever, or the build up and stuff like that. And you just don't get an insight. Whereas since Liberty Media have come involved, they've really pushed the social media side of it. The Netflix show as well, Drive to Survive, has been such a hit.
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of drivers now they've almost opened up, not the copyright, I can't think of the right word, maybe it is copyright,
Hmm.
opened up the sort of rules a little bit now. So even like you see the Formula One drivers have got YouTube channels, and
Yeah.
they're filming a lot more behind the scenes. McLaren have got a really good YouTube series
Hmm.
called Unboxed, which is just showing the behind the scenes of the race weekend. And there's just so much more now
Yeah.
than there was, basically, for the fan to watch. I mean, if you're a new fan watching Formula One and motorsport now, um, I don't know if you might look at it and say maybe we could do more. But if I try to explain to you where it was, if you weren't watching Formula One or
Yeah.
something like this back in the day, it is upside down in terms of the amount of ability you have to now be involved in it more.
Sure.
So I think, and that's been driven by Liberty Media, I really feel. So they've done a great job. In terms of sort of what we can do better, um, it's always a difficult one, actually. I think one thing they've tried to do well in Formula One this year is the regulations for the cars.
Okay.
They've introduced ground effect aerodynamics, which again I won't go into the details of how that works, but
Hmm.
the, it's intended to make less of this dirty air, as we call it,
Okay.
less turbulent air, like you have off the back of a plane or something like this, so that the cars can follow closer to be able to race better. Um, but I think one thing I would really like to start to see in the sport, in terms of the way the cars have been going, and to do the opposite, is to make them lighter,
Okay.
because they are a lot heavier than they used to be. even our car, Formula Two car with driver, it's 790 kilos, which might not sound like a lot, especially compared to a road car. It's like half the weight of a normal road car.
Mhm.
But when I was in Formula Three in 2017, we had a car that with driver was 560 kilos,
Damn.
something like that. And now 5 years later, okay,
200
the Formula
kilos
Two
less.
car is bigger. The Formula Two
Yeah.
car is bigger, so it's inevitably going to weigh a bit more than the Formula Three car. But when I think about it, there's no need for it to weigh, basically 800 kilos, and
Yeah.
that does affect the way the car drives and the tire. I would actually the other thing I would like to see a lighter car, but I would also like to see a gotta be careful what I say here. But the tire is the Pirelli tire that we race on in Formula Three, Formula Two, Formula One is too sensitive.
Okay.
It's too sensitive. We call it very temperature sensitive. Is the words we use quite often. But in karting, you get into karting in Formula Four and in Formula Renault, and the tire is not the limiting factor. The
Sure.
tire is quite almost like a plug-in and play tires.
Yeah.
Like there's nuances to it, and there's things to perfect, and you have to get the best out of your package and things like this.
Sure.
But the Pirelli tire is too sensitive. You have teams in Formula One that have got 1,500 people working for them, all these offline simulation tools. They've got tire blankets, pre-practice sessions, and they still get it wrong.
Hmm.
Um, it's
Huh.
so easy to get it wrong. And imagine in Formula Two, we don't have 10% of what they have,
Sure.
even less in terms of staff, but especially in terms of like practice and sensors on the cars to be able to accurately make a map of what this tire needs.
Yeah.
It's just guesswork. It's like black magic for better. It's black tire
Yeah.
as well, but it's like magic. It's trying to get it right is almost impossible, and especially for a junior category when you're trying to see who's the best.
Yeah.
Who is the best driver? That Formula One is looking at that we think is the best,
Hmm.
and because it's so sensitive, that some of the teams have such a monopoly over it compared to other teams in terms of
Hmm.
getting it right because they've got more money to be able to invest in learning about it.
Sure.
That you don't often see who's the best driver. To be honest,
Huh.
it's really difficult to see. A team called Prema, they're an Italian team, and they basically win. They win F3 every year. They've won F2, so God knows how many times as well. And these drivers that have the money to go and race for them because inevitably their price is higher because
Yeah.
they're the championship winning team. You
Right.
just get a lot of the drivers with money able to race for them, and then they get the results because they're racing for the good team again. And
Right.
it's just this vicious cycle. So I would love to see. I would love to see the tire to be less sensitive. I'd like to see the car be a bit lighter. I would also like the cost to come down because it would always be
Yeah.
an expensive. It would
Yeah.
also be an expensive sport. It would always be that.
Yeah.
But it's doubled since I was in Formula Three in 2000 or GP3 as it was then in 2016. The break-even point for teams then was about 600,000 euros,
Okay.
um,
So
and now it's 1.1, 1.2 million.
oh, already doubled.
So in 6 years, it's doubled. You know,
Yeah.
and in fact, if you ask me, if we did this interview in 6 years ago, I'd probably say the same thing. It's too expensive,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's really too expensive now. You priced out so many drivers that might have been able to
Right.
afford one season that with sponsorship and just had this perfect season come for them that they got the results and the Formula One team looked at them and gave them their chance. And
Right.
now the pool of drivers able to afford it is just so much smaller now.
Right.
So that would be priority number one actually.
And I could easily see what you harped on about it becomes less about who's a good driver because if you have all the money in the world and you have all the resources and you have all the money to put into those simulations, you have everything, the car itself, becomes like a beast in its own nature. And then, you have it's not like your average Joe like me could jump behind and be fine, but you have a driver who's, may not the best, but relatively good and can control it, they'll get the results like you said they need, which seems to be kind of like a monopoly. And I would agree. It definitely, from the outside looking in, it's crazy how a sport can be, and like you said, because it's cars, naturally they're going to be expensive. It's crazy how a sport like Formula racing is entrenched with so much money, but it's also at the same time, like you said, it seems kind of not exclusive, but because I like you said, it's become so much more popular, especially here in the States. it's almost as if like, you know, a lot of times you're like, oh, like on the outside looking in, like how can I get involved with that, or how do I get in with it, because of, you know, it is such like a high price, or like it seems like a very lucrative and, you know, I don't want to say bougie, but like it seems like a very affluent group of, you know, people, you know, participating in sports. But you kind of harped on it a little bit more too, and I, I didn't get to mention in the beginning too. You know, you said the heavyweights of the car, you like to see it get lighter. Do you see potentially Formula E kind of doing with that? I mean, I know, especially with an electric car, when you think of, you know, the control version, like with us, with like Teslas and like, you know, your average regular car, you know, you take out the engine, you take out the, you know, you take out the transmission, you don't have a lot of the parts. Do you see that potentially doing something, making a car a little bit lighter, but at the same time, do you see that, you know, have at all having an issue with speed or turns, like you said, at turn rate, things like that? Where do you see Formula E coming in to maybe aid some of those problems you were talking about with like the car performance, but at the same time, you know, maybe because it's an electric car, you don't necessarily know what you're going to get.
Yeah, I mean, Formula E. So Formula E is in its eighth season right now.
Okay.
So still a very new championship. It's on its second generation of
Okay.
cars. So we call it Gen One and Gen Two, for example, and they're on at the moment 4 year cycles. So next year we have Gen Three,
Okay.
um, and inevitably at the moment with the way the technology is, and it's always getting better. Electric cars and the road cars are the same. They're quite heavy.
Yeah.
But Formula E is heavy as well. It's more heavy. It's heavier than Formula One at the
Oh
moment.
wow. Okay.
Um, yeah, it's just the batteries. You
Yeah.
know, they're getting better, but they're too heavy. Whereas for Gen 3, they're making a big step with that. So the car is planned to be 100 kilos lighter,
Okay.
which is that's a completely different category if you're dropping 100 kilos off a car.
Yeah.
You know, it's adding a lot of power now, even more, like I think 30% more power next year as well. So they're making it lighter, faster, um,
Hmm.
they're having more sort of this electric tendencies of having even more regeneration capable on the car. Um, so they're progressing quite quickly
Yeah.
in that category, and it's quite exciting to watch. I mean, sort of I wonder
Hmm.
where it will go eventually in terms of um, if Formula One would start to impact it, because Formula One is the how do you say is the pinnacle, right? You know,
Yeah.
you
Yeah. Yeah.
ask every Formula E is really strong. It is
Hmm.
really difficult. The level of drivers on average is, I'm pretty sure, I would be very confident to say, is higher than Formula One. You know,
Yeah.
you have your guys at your peak in Formula One, like your Max Verstappen's, Lewis Hamilton's, Charles
Sure.
Leclerc's. These
Uh-huh.
guys that are, you know, they would absolutely have no problem racing in Formula E and probably winning. But the average of the drivers in Formula E is extremely strong. But
Hmm.
those guys themselves inevitably
Yeah.
started in the
Yeah.
sport to aim to get to Formula One,
Uh-huh.
and then it wasn't possible probably with financial. And then Formula E comes around and they take their opportunity there. So it's been, because it's still quite new in electric mobility and vehicles. It's still quite in its infancy as well. It's had its own way in terms
Okay.
of that market. It's, you know, it's the
Yeah.
only single seater series. In 10, 20 years time, I wonder where Formula One will be
Sure.
um, in terms of, will they be electric?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Because
you
of
know,
the seat.
what happens then? You know, what happens
Right.
then? And is this? I still feel like Formula E will be around, but you know, how it will have to be handled,
Yeah.
and you know how each category will have to take its own place in the market. Will
Yeah.
be interesting to see. But that side of the sport and that side of technology is advancing really quickly in motorsport at the moment.
And how does, and again, just because I'm a novice, how does that work? And since so you're on the Mercedes EQ Venturi team, when does that season take place, or how does those races work in sense of, because you're currently racing on the F2 circuit now? When would you start doing, you know, those races?
So we've just gone over halfway in the season right now. I've just been in Indonesia at the weekend, as I said earlier, and that was for Formula E race in Jakarta,
Okay.
um, which was far too hot. I don't know whose idea. I don't know whose idea it was to race there in June, but that was silly. It was 35, 40 degrees and 90% humidity. It was disgusting.
Oh.
Actually, I don't know the exchange in what I would say 35, 40 degrees. That's what you would call it over there.
in Celsius.
Um,
Yeah, you're looking at
yeah,
I was gonna say I'll pull it up real quickly.